While foreign media obsesses over American billionaires and Chinese megaprojects, something extraordinary is happening in India that nobody's talking about. A silent revolution. A transformation so massive that it could reshape the entire space industry. And yet, the question remains, is the world deliberately ignoring India's rise? Or are they simply too blind to see what's coming? Here's what makes this story different. India didn't just decide to copy what America or China were doing. No, the country took a completely different path, a path built on innovation, efficiency, and sheer determination. From a single space startup in 2014 to nearly 250 companies today, India has quietly assembled an army of space entrepreneurs. These aren't just companies making satellites or dreaming about rockets. They're actually building them, launching them, and competing on the global stage. In 2024 alone, private rockets flew, satellite networks went live, and international investors finally opened their eyes to what Indian space technology could achieve. But here's the raw truth that nobody wants to admit. This isn't about India trying to catch up. This is about India creating its own lane, with lower costs, faster execution, and a government that's backing its private sector like never before. And if people think this is just another underdog story, they're missing the point entirely. Let's go back to where it all began. Picture this, a tiny fishing village called Thumba in 1963. No fancy launch pads, no billion-dollar facilities, just a handful of scientists, a church that was converted into a laboratory, and a rocket so small that it had to be carried on a bicycle. Yes, a bicycle. This was India's first step into space. This was the birth of ISRO. Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, the man who started it all, believed something revolutionary. He believed that space wasn't a luxury reserved for wealthy nations. It was a necessity for India's development. While other countries were racing to plant flags and claim prestige, India's vision was different. The focus was on using space technology for education, communication, and disaster management. Space for the people, not just for pride. And India delivered. By 1975, the country built Aryabhata, its first satellite. In 1980, India launched its first indigenous rocket. And then came 2014, when India stunned the entire world with the Mangalyaan mission, reaching Mars at a cost lower than a Hollywood movie budget. Let that sink in. India sent a mission to Mars for less money than it took to make a film about space. But there was a problem. While ISRO was achieving the impossible, private companies were locked out. Not by accident, but by design. Space was considered too strategic, too important to be left in private hands. Only the government controlled launches. Yet quietly behind the scenes, ISRO had built an ecosystem of over 500 Indian vendors, aerospace companies, small manufacturers, component suppliers, all working together. This ecosystem thrived for decades, building India's space capabilities piece by piece. Full privatization, that only came in 2020 when the government created InSpace, finally allowing startups like Skyroot, Bellatrix, and Pixel to build and launch their own missions. And that's when India's space revolution truly ignited. Today, India's space economy stands at $15 billion. Now, some might look at that number and think it's small. After all, it's only 2% of the global space market. But here's what the critics don't understand. This is just the beginning. By 2030, experts project India's space sector will explode to $77 billion, capturing 8% of the global market. That's more than 5 times the current size in just a few years. And here's what makes this growth truly remarkable. It's not coming from ISRO alone anymore. 13 years ago, India had exactly one space startup, Dhruva Space. Today, there are nearly 250 companies building rockets, satellites, imaging systems, and orbital infrastructure. When an industry grows this fast, money follows. Since 2020, private investment into India's space sector has crossed $400 million. But where is this money going? What opportunities are Indian startups chasing? The space industry is divided into 2 major segments. First, there's Upstream, the part focused on getting things into space. This includes rockets, satellites, and launch vehicles. By 2030, India's upstream space market is expected to reach $25 billion. Right now, this is where most Indian space tech startups are receiving funding. Then there's Downstream, where space data solves real-world problems. Applications in agriculture, defense, climate monitoring, logistics, disaster management. This sector has received the least funding so far. But here's the twist. It's expected to be worth $52 billion by 2030, making it the largest chunk of India's space economy in the future. Indian startups are attacking both segments with fierce determination. Let's talk about the upstream challenges first. The biggest bottleneck in space? Getting there is expensive. And it's not just about total cost, it's about the price per kilogram. When SpaceX's Falcon 9 launches a big satellite for $97 million, it sounds massive. But because the rocket carries 22,800 kilograms, the cost drops to about $4,254 per kilo. That's actually cheap in the space world. But here's the catch. Most companies aren't launching large satellites. In 2023, 97% of all satellites launched were small satellites. For these smaller missions, the numbers get brutal. Take Rocket Lab's Electron rocket. A single launch costs $7.5 million, but because it only carries 300 kilograms, the price per kilo jumps to $25,000. That's nearly 6.5 times more expensive than Falcon 9 for the same payload. And money isn't the only problem. Time is a killer too. Small satellite companies often wait up to 18 months just to find a spot on a shared rocket because missions get booked years in advance. For small and medium satellite operators, the situation is expensive, slow, and inflexible. This is where Indian startups are changing the game. They're building rockets specifically designed for smaller satellites, making launches cheaper, faster, and more accessible. For decades, India's space launches were controlled by ISRO. If anyone wanted to launch a satellite, they had to wait for ISRO's schedule. Then Skyroot Aerospace changed everything. In November 2022, Skyroot launched Vikram S, becoming the first private company in India to send a rocket into space. Their next rocket, Vikram 1, is designed to carry payloads up to 500 kilograms. The initial Vikram 1 is an expendable launch vehicle, but Skyroot's long-term plan is to develop reusable rockets to drastically cut costs, which is a key part of their business model. They aim to be significantly more cost-effective than traditional launches. Skyroot's mission is simple: make India one of the cheapest places in the world to launch satellites. They've raised over $95 million, making them India's most well-funded space startup. While Skyroot focuses on reusability, Agnikul Cosmos is doing something even more radical. They're 3D printing entire rocket engines. Their Agnilet engine is India's first fully 3D printed rocket engine. No joints, no welds, fewer failure points. This technology enables custom-built rockets for different payloads, faster turnaround times, rockets built in months instead of years, and lower costs through reduced material waste. Agnikul isn't experimenting. Their first commercial orbital launch is scheduled for 2025. If successful, they'll be the first company in all of Asia to launch a fully 3D printed rocket. They've raised over $70 million so far. Getting satellites into orbit is one challenge. Keeping them in the right orbit, preventing collisions, and extending their lifespan is another. Satellites today have limited mobility. Once launched, they can't easily change orbit. If deployed in the wrong place, they're stuck forever. Bellatrix Aerospace is solving this with Pushpak, an orbital transfer vehicle, essentially a space tow truck that moves satellites into perfect positions. This extends satellite lifespans, prevents costly replacements, and reduces space debris. Bellatrix has raised $11 million plus research grants from both ISRO and DRDO. Now let's talk about the downstream segment, where space creates real economic value. Even though startups in this area have raised the least money so far, this represents the biggest future market for Indian companies. One major challenge? Satellite images today lack detail, making them difficult to use for precision farming, environmental monitoring, and disaster response. Pixel is solving this with hyperspectral imaging satellites. Their satellites can spot crop diseases before they spread, track illegal mining and deforestation, and detect underground water sources. NASA is already a customer. Pixel just signed a multi-million-dollar deal to provide hyperspectral satellite data to the American Space Agency. They've raised over $110 million, with Indian startups tackling every major challenge, from reducing launch costs to unlocking satellite data power. India is no longer playing catch-up. The country is building its own lane, its own identity in space. But how does India compare to other nations racing for the same opportunity? While America and China dominate globally, India's most relevant competitors right now are countries on similar trajectories. Two nations have similarly sized space industries, Japan and Iran. Japan's space industry is older than India's. The Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency has launched missions since the 1970s. However, like India, Japan's private space sector only gained momentum recently. The Japanese space economy is worth around $26 billion, with plans to double to $52 billion by the early 2030s. Major corporations like Toyota are backing space tech startups. Companies like Interstellar Technologies are developing cost-effective small satellite launchers, with their Zero rocket expected to make its first orbital launch in 2025. Space One focuses on small satellite launches using the Kairos rocket at Japan's first private spaceport. Japan's startups are mostly focused on satellite launches, similar to India. However, Japan's corporate-backed innovation gives it a different edge. But if you look at the number of launches by Japan and India in 2024, they're pretty evenly matched. Iran's space industry is primarily government-controlled, led by the Iranian Space Agency since 2004. Their space program is newer and has a much lower budget than India's, yet they managed almost as many launches in 2024 as India, showing rapid progress. In 2024, Iran's first privately developed satellites were launched. Iran's focus remains on communications and Earth observation satellites, mainly satellite development rather than rocket launches, while India and Japan have multiple startups working on both launches and space mobility. How does India compare? India currently stands between Japan and Iran in private sector involvement and market growth. Unlike Iran, India has a strong private launch industry with companies like Skyroot and Agnikul. While Japan's startups are heavily corporate-backed, India's startups are more independent and venture-funded. India's space economy is significantly bigger than Iran's and growing faster than Japan's. Both Japan and Iran are making progress, but India is emerging as the strongest private space tech player outside America and China. Now let's talk about America. The U.S. space story began in 1958 when NASA was founded in response to the Soviet Union's Sputnik launch. For decades, space was the government's exclusive domain. By the 1980s, it became clear that government-only exploration was unsustainable. The Commercial Space Launch Act of 1984 legally opened doors for private companies to build and operate rockets. The real turning point came in the 2000s when NASA launched programs inviting private players like SpaceX to develop missions. Today, America's space economy is worth over $200 billion, accounting for 40% of the global market. With the space industry projected to hit $1 trillion by 2030, America could command a $400 billion market. In 2024, America conducted 158 orbital launches, with 132 by SpaceX's Falcon 9 alone. That's more than many countries' entire space history. America leads in satellite manufacturing, Earth imaging, navigation services, and even space tourism. SpaceX's innovations like reusability dropped launch costs from $10,000 per kilo to under $3,000. Starlink operates the largest satellite constellation with over 7,000 satellites delivering global broadband. What made this possible? NASA shifted from builder to buyer, contracting private companies for services rather than running missions itself. That structural change allowed the private sector to thrive, building the most mature commercial space ecosystem on Earth. China took the opposite approach, keeping firm control while slowly inviting private participation. China's space program is run by the China National Space Administration, established in 1993. For decades, massive state-owned corporations operated the entire ecosystem. But in 2014, China officially allowed private companies to enter the sector. While most operate under government shadow, this sparked a commercial ecosystem scaling up fast. In 2024, China spent $14 billion annually on space. China conducted 68 orbital launches in 2024, making it the second most active launch country after America. Private players increasingly contribute to this count. Companies like G60 Starlink and Galaxy Space aim to challenge Starlink by launching thousands of satellites. China is expanding aggressively in deep space. It became the first country to land a rover on the moon's far side, successfully landed a rover on Mars, and plans a crewed moon mission by the 2030s. Landspace became the first worldwide to launch a methane-fueled rocket to orbit in 2023. Galactic Energy achieved multiple successful orbital launches, becoming one of China's most reliable small launch companies. China's space economy remains top-down. The government sets the roadmap, allocates funding, and guides innovation. But within those parameters, it created room for a thriving commercial sector entering global markets. For a country without private space companies a decade ago, China moved incredibly fast. While it may not yet match America's commercial maturity, its pace, scale, and government coordination make it a serious global contender. Now back to India. The country's space tech industry is transforming, driven by strong government backing and a new wave of private startups. India has an ambitious goal: increase its share in the global space market from 2% to 8% by 2033. To manage this transformation, the government created InSpace, the Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center. InSpace wasn't designed just to regulate private space activity, it actively promotes it. InSpace grants clearances, facilitates access to ISRO's world-class infrastructure, and bridges the government and private ecosystem. The impact was significant. In 2014, India had one space startup. By 2025, that number grew to nearly 250 startups working on launch vehicles, satellites, and space-based applications for agriculture, defense, and disaster management. The government didn't stop at deregulation. It put money behind words. In 2024, India announced the Technology Adoption Fund, 500 crore rupees, about $60 million, to help startups bridge the valley of death between research and commercial viability. Startups could get 60% of project costs covered, established players up to 40%. Alongside that, the government launched a 1,000 crore rupee, about $120 million venture capital fund, specifically for space tech startups. By late 2024, 18 early-stage startups received funding, and 14 successfully completed orbital launches. India reworked foreign direct investment rules to attract global investors. As of 2024, 100% FDI is allowed in satellite manufacturing, 74% in satellite services and ground infrastructure, and up to 49% in launch vehicles and spaceport operations. These bold reforms created a ripple effect. Since 2020, over $350 million has been invested in Indian space tech startups. Venture capital is flowing, global partnerships are forming, and India is becoming a serious contender on the global space tech stage. Building rockets and satellites is only part of the puzzle. The government focused on infrastructure, ensuring startups had places to test, assemble, and launch. New space parks are coming up in states like Kerala and Karnataka, offering subsidized access to testing, integration, and fabrication facilities. These hubs aren't just real estate, they're accelerators of innovation. The government streamlined approvals through the Indian Space Policy of 2023, making it easier for private companies to build, launch, and operate space assets without bureaucratic delays. ISRO has been a collaborative force, now outsourcing up to 80% of PSLV production to private vendors, forming a robust public-private partnership model mirroring what NASA did with SpaceX. Where is India focusing its energy? The government identified 3 core verticals: launch vehicles, satellites, and space applications. In launch vehicles, India is capitalizing on the biggest pain point in the global space industry: high launch costs and long wait times. Startups like Skyroot and Agnicool are stepping in with low-cost, rapid launch rockets that undercut global competitors by up to 50%. These aren't prototypes. They're flying and attracting international attention. In satellite manufacturing, India has launched over 430 foreign satellites to date. The goal is becoming a global hub for small satellite production. Dhruva Space, for example, brought satellite production time from 3 to 4 years down to just 18 months. This has major implications for both domestic and global clients. Then there's space data and applications, a segment projected to be worth $52 billion for India by 2030. Companies like Pixel are making waves with hyperspectral imaging satellites, providing incredibly detailed Earth observation data. This has huge implications for climate monitoring, precision agriculture, and defense surveillance. All of this positions India as a low-cost, high-efficiency alternative to America and China, helping Indian startups attract clients from Europe, Australia, and Southeast Asia. The government isn't just enabling a space economy, it's actively building one piece by piece, booster by booster. If the past 5 years indicate anything, the next decade could see India transform from an efficient launch pad to a global space superpower. So here's the truth that the world needs to understand. While critics questioned whether India could compete, the country was busy building. While doubters pointed to budgets and resources, India focused on innovation and efficiency. While the world watched American billionaires and Chinese state projects, India quietly assembled an army of entrepreneurs, engineers, and dreamers who believe that space belongs to everyone, not just the superpowers. And here's what makes this transformation even more powerful. This isn't happening because of one company or one visionary leader. This is a movement. From Bangalore to Chennai, from Kerala to Gujarat, thousands of engineers are working late nights. Hundreds of entrepreneurs are risking everything they have. Dozens of investors are betting on Indian innovation. This is a collective awakening, a national mission that transcends politics, regions, and backgrounds. When a nation of 1.4 billion people decides to reach for the stars, the universe itself has to make room. The space race isn't over. It's just beginning. And this time, India isn't asking for permission to compete. India is rewriting the rules of the game. India is showing that you don't need to be first to be the best, that you don't need the biggest budget to have the biggest impact, that passion, intelligence, and hard work can level any playing field. So here's the final question that should keep the world awake at night. If India achieved all this while being underestimated, underfunded, and overlooked, what will happen when the world finally realizes what's coming? What will happen when India's 250 startups become 2,500? The answer is clear. The world won't just be spectators to India's space revolution anymore. Because when a nation rises with this level of determination, this intensity of passion, and this magnitude of strength, everyone else faces only two options: try to compete or seek to collaborate. And here's the beautiful truth. No matter which path they choose, India emerges victorious. Share this story with every Indian you know. Let them feel the pride that comes from witnessing their nation achieve the impossible. If you're an Indian watching this right now, take a moment. Remember all those voices that criticized India. Remember those who said the country was too poor, too late, too incapable. Remember the mockery, the doubt, the dismissive attitudes. Where are those critics now? Where are those voices that laughed when India dreamed of space? They're silent. Because reality has a way of silencing doubt. Because achievements speak louder than any criticism ever could.